In this lesson, I want to continue talking about moving into collaboration. Well, remember that collaboration is communication in which you're honest, even assertive, about your own thoughts and feelings and needs and wants, but you're also willing for your partner to do the same. You have empathy for your partner's thoughts and feelings and wants. As we've been talking about, this is the healthiest of all communication styles and is particularly important as you get into deeper and more sensitive conversations. Again, I shared with you in the last lesson that this isn't as natural for most people. Most people tend to be dominators, accommodators, or avoiders, and so it takes a conscientious decision on our part to move into collaboration. Well, this kind of communication requires more of a vulnerability. It's a willingness to be open, to expose the softer side of yourself. Even though you're assertive, you're not doing it in a dogmatic way. You're giving up pretense and protection and defensiveness. I like Brené Brown's definition of vulnerability. She says, vulnerability is about having the courage to show up and be seen. Vulnerability is showing up in your relationship in an authentic and real way. It's crucial to building a safe and nurturing relationship. As a matter of fact, Brené Brown, who's done literally thousands of interviews on intimacy, has said this: there can be no intimacy, emotional intimacy, spiritual intimacy, physical intimacy, without vulnerability. She goes on to say, one of the reasons there is such an intimacy deficit today is because we don't know how to be vulnerable. It's about being honest with how we feel, about our fears, about what we need, and asking for what we need. Vulnerability is glue that holds intimate relationships together. End of quote. And yet we resist vulnerability. We live in a society that values being strong and self-sufficient, and vulnerability can be seen as weak. We believe that vulnerability will expose us to being hurt and humiliated or embarrassed, so we keep our distance. But I want to say that vulnerability is not weakness. In fact, it takes great courage to be vulnerable, to be seen as you are in this moment rather than as you wish to be seen. If I can go back to our 4 styles of communication, there are a number of reasons that you and I slip into dominating, accommodating, and avoiding. One is that they're familiar. You've done them before and they've become habitual. However, another and more important reason is that they keep you from being vulnerable. All 3 protect you from your deeper, more vulnerable feelings. Dominators do it through toughness and anger. Accommodators by retreating and withdrawing emotionally. Avoiders do it by pretending everything's okay. But here's the thing. You're going to need to become more vulnerable if you and your spouse are going to have more intimate conversations, if you're going to communicate in a healthier way and even resolve deep conflict. Let me offer an example. Let's assume that a husband is feeling lonely. He's missing his spouse who's been putting in really long hours on the job. Well, those are pretty vulnerable feelings. And he doesn't want to be very direct about these feelings because doing so feels unsafe. So, he's made the decision, probably unconsciously made the decision that it's better to feel lonely than face the possibility of rejection. And yet if he were to be more vulnerable and direct, he might find a good time to communicate with his wife and then say something like this: I'm feeling lonely. I'm feeling some distance in our relationship. Seems to me that your business and other concerns are more important than our relationship. Ooh, that's a pretty risky statement. He doesn't know how his wife is going to respond. She may cut him off. She may put him down. She may scoff or in some way dismiss his statement. So rather than be that vulnerable, it's easier for him to go into his preferred style: dominate, accommodate, or avoid. Let's say he's a dominator. Then he'll come out by attacking her. You really don't think about anybody around here but yourself, do you? You work late, you come home late, you don't care about me or the family as long as you're advancing in your career. Well, can you see how this verbal attack covers up his more vulnerable feelings? It's his way of protecting himself and also trying to guilt his wife into changing. Well, let's say that this man is an accommodator. Then he's more likely to pout or give his wife the silent treatment when she comes home. He might be more distant and withdrawn, maybe even sulking. His wife might ask him if everything's okay, and he'll say, yeah, fine, inside knowing that it's not fine. He's caught up in the conflict of not knowing how to take care of his own needs while still being nice and supportive of his wife. He's hoping she'll sense that something is wrong and become more sensitive to his needs. But in the long run, accommodators also can become more passive-aggressive. Because of unspoken needs or smoldering ill will, he may likely hold affection or goodwill, fail to keep his end of some agreement, or maybe talk to the kids in a way that might be hurtful to her. He'll act out his hurt, but in more subtle, indirect ways than the dominator. Well, let's suppose that this man is an avoider. He'll handle his feelings by believing that he can take care of his own needs. He'll deny or pretend that he really doesn't need much from the relationship, that he can really be self-sufficient on his own. And this may work to some extent, but unfortunately at a cost. Over time, the couple will grow further apart until they're really more isolated, alienated from each other, feeling an emptiness and loneliness about what's missing, which could easily set one of them up for something more serious like an affair. Well, as I said before, all of these tactics, dominating, accommodating, and avoiding, are workable in so many ways day to day when things are going smoothly. But again, as issues become more important, conversations become more sensitive, as the stakes become higher, they keep you safe, but distance, unable to get real closeness. And you don't use these strategies because you don't care about your relationship. You use them because they protect you from being hurt, from being vulnerable. It's easier to blame or attack or retreat or pretend everything is okay, rather than have a real conversation in which you could be hurt. Not only do these strategies protect you from being hurt, but they also sometimes become ways of manipulating your spouse to get what you want. When you rely on them, when your emotions are high, then you're harming your relationship. You're learning to play games rather than create a loving relationship. The alternative is to learn to be more vulnerable in your communication. To be more vulnerable means to expose your true feelings, to ask for what you need or want, to talk about your fears and your failures and say what you really think. When you're vulnerable, you're in the present moment. Your posture is open. Your eyes, your face are soft. Your words are more gentle. Your heart is compassionate towards yourself as well as your partner. I want to connect this concept of vulnerability back to our lesson on self-responsibility. It's a lot easier to be vulnerable if you're willing to be responsible for your own experience, because then you're not giving your spouse so much emotional power. You're willing to support yourself. You've got your own back, so to speak. Even if you get a response from your partner that you don't like, you still support yourself, the support that makes the most difference in the long run. So let me ask you, how vulnerable are you in your relationship today? Can you say what you think and ask for what you need in a soft way and without fear? And are you willing to learn to be even more vulnerable in the way you communicate? There are risks, but also incredible rewards. Well, something that makes it a lot easier to be vulnerable when you disclose and when you assert yourself is when you and your partner practice vulnerable listening. In fact, learning to listen well makes it possible for the two of you to become more vulnerable in your speech as you disclose your feelings and your thoughts and your needs. Let's talk about that in the next lesson.